Okay, good afternoon. So people are pouring in, numbers are increasing, but I've got some housekeeping and bits and bobs to do. So thank you for turning up on time. You get to hear the exciting stuff about recording questions and timing. So my name is Ben Stansfield. I'm a sustainability lawyer here at Gowling WLG. And my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, Biodiversity Net Gain 12 months in, or if you prefer, BNG's first birthday party. So as I said, we've got a bit quick housekeeping to do. So number one, recording. Today's session will be recorded. We'll upload it to our website and we'll email it to you as a follow-up. And you might even find it on LinkedIn as well. Questions, at the bottom of the screen, you'll find a Q&A button. Please use that throughout. We will be picking them up. We will try and answer as many questions in today's session as we can. If we don't get to your question live, I am sorry. I probably just didn't understand it. But we will get back to you separately. But yes, my top tip on your questions is if you keep them super short, they've got more chance of being picked up by me. And then finally, timing, we've got an hour in the diary. So hopefully you've got your sandwiches or your soup. We will try and finish a little earlier. So I'm going to introduce my brilliant panelists in just a moment, but first I'm going to take the chair's privilege and take 60 seconds just to set the nature scene. And it has been a wild and exciting 12 months for nature and biodiversity. Obviously, we've had mandatory or statutory BNG come into effect in England, so obviously more on that shortly. That's why we're here. The UK government published a development and nature recovery working paper in December, which had some fairly exciting and revolutionary ideas about delivery of strategic mitigation and developer-led funds. We've had the 16th Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, COP16, in Cali, in Colombia last October. That ran out of time and purely by coincidence is ongoing today, it's this week in Rome. And key to that is securing $200 billion per year into nature recovery by 2030 globally. And then yesterday, hot off the press, the UK government published its biodiversity strategy, which is a response to that biodiversity framework agreed in Montreal at COP15. And in there, BNG is described as powerful, which is a very useful endorsement, given some of the uncertainty rumours we might talk about later. And then finally, in recent weeks and days, we've had a lot of discussion in the news and the media around the potential tension between the need for economic development and protection of the natural world. And great crested newts once again taking one for the team and getting blamed for everything. But look, that's about 5 webinars worth of material. So we're going to stick with BNG today. But you know, biodiversity, it's a big issue for all of us now. It's a boardroom issue. And if you're a developer, a landowner, a manufacturer, investor, a lender, or even if I dare say a law firm, biodiversity is an issue you need to be thinking about. But it's new. It's a new language. New set of regulations, loads of new acronyms, and a new approach we need to learn. But fortunately, we have 3 superb teachers with us today. And I'm delighted to be joined by Helen Emmerson, my colleague, partner in our real estate department and the co-chair of our energy practice. We have Jack Potter, director of Wild Capital, one of the UK's leading habitat banks, providing both biodiversity units and nutrient neutrality credits. And we have Nick White, the principal advisor on Net Gain at Natural England. So we're slide free today. We're going to keep this quite fast-paced, free range and chatty. We've got a rough idea of what might come up, but your questions could take us into some unexpected and unusual places. So let's see where we go. But first of all, I'm going to ask each of you to give me a 60-second, look, we're 12 months into BNG Life, give me a 60-second answer on how's it been for you. So let's go Helen, Jack, and then Nick, please.
Thank you, Ben. How's it been for me? We've learnt a lot over the last 12 months, I think it's fair to say. For a lot of the part of the part of the year, we were certainly in the dark, I think, as to what local authorities were going to be looking for in terms of the detail of 106 agreements, conservation covenants, and that does make life challenging for landowners, developers looking to do deals. The market for offsite habitat banks is something that I've definitely seen an increasing interest in. I think at the start of the year, the assumption was developers would be delivering their BNG on site. I think that perspective has moved and there is a lot more interest in looking at how an offsite solution might be more easily deliverable for projects. But the devil is really in the detail, as you might expect a lawyer to say. And I think we've definitely seen some deals take longer this year than they might otherwise have done. And given we've got a pretty challenging economic backdrop at the moment, I think it's fair to say that's not at times been hugely welcome.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen. Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and thanks to Gowlings for having me on today. Yeah, I guess for Wild Capital, it's been, to start with, probably a slow start, to be honest. There was probably to be expected a little bit of a lag between, mandatory net gain sort of hitting planning developments and small sites later than that, which go through the system quicker. So there was a little bit of a lag. There was inquiries coming through, but they were sort of finding out what the price was going to be, what the impact on developments were. And then that has really, really rapidly started ramping up and just seems to be increasing exponentially, to be honest, at least over the last 6 months. And yeah, it's really good to see, ourselves, Wild Capital, getting traction. I think based on some published figures from other habitat providers, I think we may be the highest revenue out of the National Habitat Bank providers in the country. And yeah, I think the offering that we're offering, committing nature forever, legally securing that is definitely sort of chiming with some clients, in particular infrastructure builders and councils, for example, and also developers who, I guess, remember 30 years ago and want to look back in 30 years' time and say the nature that we provided has been lasting, like their developments are. So yeah, it's exciting. It's very busy, and it's just trying to keep up the pace now.
Perfect. Thank you. And then, Nick, have you been busy?
It's been terribly quiet. It's been tumbleweed going through. No, it's been a really fascinating year, actually, because obviously it was busy for us before it went live as well. And then once it went live, I was dealing with a lot of queries from a range of kind of different sectors and professions and organisations, as people, as Helen and yourself were alluding to, kind of trying to understand, to get to grips with what was in the policy, perhaps wasn't sometimes set out as clearly as at times as well, and trying to fill some gaps. And then, as Jack said, in terms of the actual delivery side of things, it being a bit slower, but starting to see that really begin to accelerate, particularly from kind of the autumn onwards as well. And a lot of sites now coming onto the register, a lot of kind of activity happening within development sites as well, and a growing level of kind of wider interest in what's going on in England as well. So getting lots of inquiries from around the world about this.
Perfect. Thank you. Perfect. Well, Helen, you talked about deals, and that's probably a good place to start. And actually, I think that's something that's not often covered on sort of BNG webinars and what have you, because that's, for a lot of our clients, that's where BNG first comes up, right? So how's it going? How's BNG coming up in land deals, and are sellers and their agents, are they fully up to speed on the acronyms and the issues?
So the 30-year commitment aspect of BNG is proving particularly challenging, especially in a leasehold context. And what I mean by that is, for example, where you've got developers who are taking a 30-year lease of a parcel of land for development. We've got landlords, perhaps quite understandably, saying at the end of that 30-year lease, we would like you to reinstate the site. So far, so normal, but the expectation is you are reinstating all of that habitat work that you've incorporated as well, where you've delivered your BNG on site. And that I'm not sure that's necessarily quite what the policy might have intended. And I suspect in due course, Nick, you'll be able to comment on that perhaps. But there is then a question about, well, if we are reinstating, well, how are we going to do that? What's the most appropriate way to do that? Conversely, similar scenario, the developer who looks to, for example, extend their development, repower a development, looking for another planning permission. I've got developers saying to me, well, I haven't got to provide any more BNG, have I, for this project, even though I've got a new planning permission. I can hand all my BNG land back to the landowner, can't I? I don't want to pay rent for that anymore. So whilst I said right at the start of this that we've all learned a lot, I think there is still a huge education piece needed for all of us around, in practice, how BNG is being delivered. And BNG is only one part of the natural capital story as well. And landowners quite rightly are keen to protect the value of natural capital within their land. But again, there is uncertainty, which is unhelpful for a deal perspective, because there is then a desire to protect the value of natural capital, but I can't entirely express what that is that I'm asking to protect as a landowner, but I definitely like to secure the value for the future. And that's really tricky for a developer to incorporate. And we are seeing, actually, in the context of BNG, overage agreements start to be proposed. So, land has been sold, BNG units have been created on that land, but a previous landowner is looking to secure additional value should extra BNG units be created on that land in the future. And then we've ended up in discussions around, well, how do we identify what those extra units are? How are they being managed? Are they being managed in a different way to the original units? How are we valuing them? And in certain situations, I've certainly had deals where it's all potentially started to become a bit more hassle than potentially it's worth. So it's certainly providing a lot of interesting debate, possibly a bit of delay as well, actually, in transactions, as we're all still continuing to grapple with that BNG incorporated into the deal scenario.
Perfect. And Jack, I think we've spoken in the past about, you've been looking at sort of acquiring sites for your habitat banks, and does that, as soon as sort of farmers or sellers hear the word habitat bank, are they're acting an extra zero to the purchase price, thinking that you've got this new sort of asset class that's going to make bazillions, and they want a slice of it?
Yeah, some do. I think the trend is when agents get involved, that's when the zeros start being added to the value of the land, and generally that kills deals, because we acquire land, and the reason for that is because we want to be able to commit it to nature forever, which is difficult with a lease scenario. Not impossible. We are doing some, but it needs the landowner to sign up to it effectively. So when we acquire land and the landowner gets wind that we're doing it for Biodiversity Net Gain, everyone's heard about it. They think that's a new revenue stream. There's lots of money in it, and they start thinking that their land is special, I think, is the main thing, which is not strictly correct. We're picky about where we buy. We don't want to buy land in the middle of an arable desert with no biodiversity anywhere near, because biodiversity won't be able to access our sites if we did that. So we do want them near nature, but quite often, we operate in local authorities and national character area geographies, and generally most of those have the ability to deliver a number of different sites which far exceed the demand that's coming forwards from development. So that makes those landowners that are saying that they're special not so special, because there are lots of other options. And I think the sooner that landowners understand that, where there's real value is where you've got a landowner that says, I am in a local nature recovery strategy, therefore my land has an uplift. That would be a reasonable approach to say that there is an uplift in value, because that translates to an uplift in biodiversity unit value, which is quantifiable. So I think that's probably the only scenario where we would really entertain it, or if there's deals with particular developers where, there's an acquisition of land back to back with a development deal, for example.
Yeah.
But other times it's not appropriate, and there's lots of other options to go to, so it tends to kill the deal. And I think agents need to start to realise that.
Perfect. And Nick, I wonder if it's possible, you could pick up on sort of Helen's point around that the reinstatement after 30 years, and I'm sort of deliberately asking you for a natural England view, because I know what Jack's gonna say around that, and Jack, I will ask you to come in on that as well. But what happens after 30 years, Nick? Do farmers just get to go and plough it all up again, and we lose it forever?
So that's the outcome we don't want to see. And it, to an extent, it will depend on what's been created in the first place. So if you've started to create quite high quality habitats, then they themselves start to get their own protections within planning. What we're trying to point out, though, is the fact that you can actually potentially extend the 30-year period beyond that. So Jack is offering kind of beyond 30 years anyway. But what you can do, and what a number of landowners are recognizing, is that actually if you've got scope to further enhance the quality of the habitat, either through its condition or through its distinctiveness, you can begin to essentially enter into kind of layered legal agreements as well, where you've got a legal agreement that's running. You may meet the habitat outcome that agreement specifies within 10 years, for example, if it's a grassland. If your land has got the right kind of soils, etc., to potentially further improve that as a habitat, you could then end a second agreement that's kind of sitting on top of that first one, and begin to extend the period of time that you've got land under management. Obviously, 30 years ahead, those is still quite a long time, but we'd still expect there to be other kind of schemes available which are more geared towards kind of helping people to manage and maintain habitats rather than continuing to improve it. But no, at the end of 30 years, you as the landowner have fulfilled your obligation. You don't, there's nothing in that that says you have to keep that land unless the habitat is a particular quality, then it begins to get some level of protection. But we want to make the point that actually you've got opportunities potentially still to acquire further revenue from that land by entering these kind of layered agreements as well. And that's what we would like to see over time.
Yeah, well, as a lawyer, I love the idea of more legal agreements on top of other legal agreements. That sounds just my cup of tea. But Jack, you're unusual in the market, right? Because you're not doing 30 years.
Yeah, and I think it's, it is one of the driving reasons for the setting up of Wild Capital is because, I sort of came out of Natural England and the Biodiversity Net Gain team, went into consultancy, and I think I was slightly frustrated at what the market looked like, how it was generating. And yeah, I mean, the whole 30-year period, I mean, I'm from a farming family, and our family have been in environmental stewardship of one form or another for the last 30 years. And I know that our family does not consider that to be permanent enhancements that have been paid for by taxpayers, because that's an ongoing sort of grant system which pays for benefits. If those benefits weren't there, then it would probably justify intensifying the land to fill the gap, and generate that money. So, and I saw as a consultant that was also the mindset of many other farmers that are entering into lease agreements. And the first question that I was asked as a consultant, that was, a farmer looking to go into a lease agreement was, can I plough the land up again at the end of 30 years? And I think the main point, just picking from Nick's description, which is very valid and correct and hopeful, but I think the key word is could. They could do that. And the reality is most of these schemes that are being generated, we will always strive for excellence, and for overachieving on what we promise in the legal agreement. And we hope to deliver priority habitats, which would be protected under existing legislation like the environmental impact regulations. But the reality is most of them probably won't. They're going to be semi-species rich grassland, which isn't a priority habitat. Maybe 30 years more, they might be priority habitat, but within 30 years, I think it's quite a big ask. Likewise, scrub is not a priority habitat. It may well support priority species, but there's a lot of sort of ifs and buts here, which doesn't have security over that nature. And the developments which are justifying paying for that nature are going to be lasting. They are going to be for perpetuity in one form or another. So I think it is right that, the nature is secured legally for nature forever. And at the moment, yes, we may well be the only ones doing that, but we're not doing it because we want, to sort of seize the market and tell people, come to us because we're the only good guys here. There's a lot of good people out there that are doing great things, and I hope that other providers, our competitors, effectively see what we're doing and follow in our footsteps and say, yes, that is actually the right thing to do, despite it being, I guess, perceived to be above and beyond the statutory requirements at the moment.
Yeah, understood. Sorry, Nick, you can.
I was just to come in on that as well. I mean, there was quite an active decision taken early on when thinking about the kind of original kind of primary legislation in terms of, if you look internationally, offsetting often is secured in perpetuity, but recognizing that in England we live on a small crowded island and there's a lot of competing demands on land, and the recent land use framework hopefully will help in that regard. But critically, for this to work, we did need landowners on boards. And the view was that although there are landowners out there like Jack and others who are happy to kind of enter into quite long-term, potentially perpetuity agreements, they are the exception. And so 30 years was arrived at as this would get enough interest from the landowning community to make this a viable kind of proposition. And with the hope as well, though, that for many landowners, the idea of kind of essentially farming for nature is new to them as well. And hopefully through their experience of this, it will become less alien and something they can see actually there's a value to them, there's a value to wider society in continuing to do this as well. So.
Thank you. Okay, well, that's a grand start. Let's move on to Nick. You are a fellow lover of LinkedIn, and you did an amazing sort of Nick White's BNG Advent Calendar countdown, where you talked about a different misconception around BNG every day. What sort of what haven't we got? What's frustrated you the most? What have we not got our heads around that you're just sort of banging your head on the wall about?
I think probably the biggest, and this is a sort of catch-all answer, I guess, because I think and I think Helen's alluded to this to an extent as well, because this touches on across a number of different areas, touches across a number of different professions, is variability of advice. So people interpret, everyone's looking at the same pieces of legislation, the same pieces of published guidance that have come out from government, yet the way that then gets interpreted by people can be quite different. And sometimes you can point to, well, potentially the guidance itself isn't as clear as it perhaps could have been, and there's been instances where guidance has been clarified. But other times it's just somewhat bemusing. Like for me, an example would be, a really frustrating one, is instances, and I know this happens because I hear it firsthand, where developers are told by a planning authority, well, if you're not going to deliver your gains, if you can't do it on site, off site within this planning authority, we're going to refuse you planning permission, which is legally wrong on at least 2 counts. So it's just like, it's that inconsistency. Equally, we had instances where this is a kind of a Gowling's legal company. Other lawyers working for local government were saying to their clients that the council, or you can't enter into Section 106 agreement with a landowner. That's not legally possible. And then having to have a conversation with the local authority to saying, you may want to have different legal advice around this as well, because it is possible for you to do. So it's things like that. I mean, it is beginning to ease through as people, I think, have got to grips. And I think, to be fair to people, BNG is a real disruptor. It's a paradigm shift. It's causing people to have to think quite differently in a lot of different ways. And that can take time as well. So that's, I think, been the biggest frustration, if you like, that variability of advice that's been coming through from different planning authorities, different ecologists, different lawyers, etc., etc.
Yeah. And you touched on Section 106s. Obviously there's 3 ways to sort of secure BNG, and there's planning conditions for sort of non-significant on-site.
Yeah.
And then you've got either a 106 or a conservation covenant. And for a while we were all 106s because that was the only way we could do it, and it was tricky. There was a resource issue, I think, with LPAs, but it seems to me we're moving towards conservation covenants as being, that's the future, right? Is that your view? Because obviously you're seeing the register, what's going on there. Is it predominantly concovs or?
I mean, certainly in terms of the offsite elements, there's more and more concovs coming through, and clearly they were coming from a kind of literally a standing start as well. Because when BNG first was announced, one of the issues was that concovs have only just started to become available as well. But no, we're seeing more offsite lands now coming through that's legally secured through conservation covenants. But on site, it's still very much Section 106 is planning conditions, and we were interested as well as to how much would the legal profession engage with concovs, because obviously a lot of familiarity with 106 is much less so with concovs as well. So that's been interesting as well to see the level of engagement people have kind of had with concovs. And I think some extent, offsite, that's been driven by issues about being able to actually get a 106. There's been a bit of a lottery around whether that's been even possible for you, which has potentially helped drive people towards concovs. And also there's more providers of concovs now as well. So there's greater availability, lower prices, etc.
Well, as an aside, when we were drafting our first conservation covenant, we sort of spoke to our colleagues in Ontario and Canada because they have a similar thing, and we got some template documents which had lots of references to guns, hunting, and bears. Right. So we had to tailor them a little bit for the local market. But this is perhaps a bit of an unfair question because it's more of a DEFRA issue in terms of designating responsible bodies. But do you think we've got enough RBs? Are we going to get a load more competition? Obviously, we've got local authorities doing it, but they're saying just in my patch.
So I know there is a bit of a lag at the moment. I mean, so it's a separate team within DEFRA that's been dealing with conservation covenants, and obviously you have to get Secretary of State approval for it. So I'm aware of entities that have been applying or have applied to become responsible bodies, and it's taking a while for that process to kind of run through. And I think some planning authorities in particular have been a bit frustrated by that, particularly where they're also a responsible authority for local nature recovery strategies, etc. But more and more are coming through. So I think we're expecting numbers to continue to go up in that regard as well. So I think you will get a greater plurality of responsible bodies in the near future as well, and one's focusing particularly on certain areas, I think, as well.
Perfect. Jack, when Helen and I advising clients, and they go off and get they need some offsite units, and they go to 2 or 3 different providers, and they say, what do you think? Can you look at the terms? And we do that. And one of the sort of not frustration, that's a bit strong. One of the sort of curiosities they have is how come some are this much money, and yet a different provider is wanting to charge us, substantial percentage more. And they're, biodiversity unit's a biodiversity unit, right? So why is there such a differential in price? What makes a good unit?
I think there's probably 2 things mainly there. One is the habitat type. So some habitats, yield more than other habitats on whatever the baseline is. If it has a low yield and delivers low units per hectare, then it becomes more expensive. If it has a high yield, then you can deliver more units per hectare. And land value is quite a large proportion of the credit value. So I guess that's one element that's worth probably considering. There's, for those that are listening that aren't so familiar with the trading rules of the metric, there's trading rules. They're sort of slightly different for the area, habitats, hedgerows, and rivers and streams. But generally, the more valuable the habitat, the higher the distinctiveness, the more strict the trading rules are. And but also, if you deliver a high distinctiveness habitat, it's got flexibility to mitigate for a whole range of different habitats sort of that lie underneath it. So there could be difference in prices that's offering to mitigate for the same habitat based on that. But I guess the other thing is the spatial risk multiplier. So that has an impact, and seems to be a little bit of confusion around what people need to buy when the spatial risk multiplier is applied. We take the approach that if someone needs some units and it says in their metric that they need a certain number of units to meet their trading rules and their net gain requirement, then we will quote for that number of units, even if the spatial risk multiplier is applied. We will quote for that number of units, and that's the price. Some local authorities and some developers seem to think that when the spatial risk multiplier applies, that they need to buy 33% more units or 2 times the number of units that it says in their metric. And I think that confusion's partly come about because the impact of the spatial risk multiplier has been taken out of the tabs where all the calculations are done, and it's been put into the headline results, which then actually shows them that they need double the units partway through the calculation. So I think that's where probably the confusion has slightly arisen from. But the result is effectively that when the spatial risk multiplier applies to our site, we still deliver the units that they need, but it just takes double the amount of land, or 33% more land, to deliver the same number of units. That's what we quote for, and that's actually what gets shown on the biodiversity register. So when the local authority are cross-referencing their biodiversity gain plan, which they need to discharge their pre-commencement condition, they will be able to see what's been allocated to them. They'll go on the register and they'll see that number of units has been allocated to them. And that will be a post-spatial risk multiplier. So that encompasses the spatial risk multiplier. So it won't be double the units as some people see sort of assume.
Perfect.
And I guess
Sorry,
point of the integrity as well, Ben. I know
Yes.
you touched on it before this call. So yeah, talking about higher integrity systems, and I guess our offering of having sort of independently ring-fenced finance, which is independently managed, and we don't have access to that. So we're sort of setting aside that money and we don't have access to it. That's a high integrity system, as well as proposing it for perpetuity. We're finding that actually, even though we're doing those things, we're not actually more expensive. So you don't have to pay more to have a better quality product 99% of the time, I'd say.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm just going to encourage people. We are halfway through. We've had a few questions come through, which we can sort of we'll pick up as we go. But please don't forget. I know it's very easy just to sort of absorb all the information you're getting in the webinar, but please do ask a few questions as well. I was going to ask a bit about monitoring, because that's often, certainly from the developer side, you buy a unit and then you're buying a compliance product, right? You can show that to the local authority, you can start digging on site, and you don't ever really need to think about what's happening at the Habitat Bank again. Although in reality, a lot of clients do because they care. So what does monitoring involve? Because you've got 30 years of monitoring. Is that someone going around with a clipboard counting bumblebees? Is it putting drones up using AI to work out what's going on? And I guess, Nick, how much do you care as Natural England what's going on once you've got a decent concov and a good habitat management plan? Are you looking at the monitoring?
So we don't directly ourselves, but we do have a real interest in this, because what we want to see at the end of the day is good quality outcomes being delivered and kind of managed and maintained as well. So, but I think there's a variety. So there's a variety of different ways that monitoring can take place. The first thing to say is that you should have set out in the habitat management and monitoring, including the title plan, in terms of how you're going to, as a landowner, kind of provide this information to the either the responsible body if it's secured through a concov, or the planning authority if it's a section 106 that's securing the land. And that legal agreement should set that out as well, so it's quite clear to all parties involved what the expectation is. In practice, we know that there's always going to be resource pressures in terms of actually who's available to be able to do this. And a lot of it should be fairly routine as well. So we think there's actually a real role for technology to come into play here as well. I know a number of kind of products are now kind of available in the marketplace where they can give you, using a combination of aerial, drone, etc., imagery, a kind of an analysis in terms of, does this site look like it's performing as you would expect it to do? And I think that's helpful, because I think what that then enables is the actual human effort to be much more targeted towards those sites where it doesn't appear that the progress is being made that's being suggested. And we're talking about 30 years here, so there's still plenty. There should be plenty of time to address if things have gone wrong as well. And again, the agreement should set out what the expectations are on the parties. So there's time for landowners to address this. So I think it's going to be a combination of different types of both remote as well as on the ground kind of monitoring. It will depend, going to an extent, of what Jack was also saying on the habitats involved. Some are inherently riskier and more prone to failure, and you may want to focus more efforts on those than others. And then at the end of the day, if necessary, there's obviously the recourse to enforcement if there's really been no effort to deliver the outcomes required. No one wants to get to that point, so we want there to be opportunities to address things and making use of the kind of resourcing available and the technologies coming through to kind of help support that process as well.
Right, so we have a question in, and I'm going to come to you, Helen, first, but I think everyone's going to probably have a view on this. But question is, if you're acting for a small house builder, isn't it just a lot easier for them to pay a financial contribution under a 106 rather than having to deal with all this BNG malarkey, doing lots of postage stamps around the country? Just have a commuted sum under 106. Is that what small developers are going to want, Helen? Would they prefer that?
So I think the answer is undoubtedly making that one easy payment, and you get your piece of paper, as you alluded to earlier, Ben, It certainly is very attractive, both from the perspective of the small house builder is very competent and specialised in what they do, and habitat monitoring is not their specialist subject. So, it's not core business for them, and that is a very real consideration. And I'm certainly aware of clients who are having to go through that analysis of, do we want to pivot our business to include delivery of BNG as something that we do in-house, or actually do we just pay the money to the jackpotters of this world and get the piece of paper? The other consideration, as well as do we want to do this ourselves, is also around if it's a project, a development that's going to be sold in the future. You're potentially going to have to go through a diligence process on that. How are you going to demonstrate to an incoming buyer, an incoming funder, that you have complied with and are still, and indeed will for the remainder of the 30 years, be complying with those obligations going forwards? And I think that is a relevant factor in considering whether an offsite provision is an easier solution or not for a particular developer. That's not to say, though, that we don't have a lot of clients who are really keen to commit to biodiversity across their portfolio, and it is something they genuinely want to incorporate as part of their business.
Yeah, Nick, is there anything you would like to add to that, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of building what Helen was saying at the end, particularly there as well. So I agree with her. There will be instances where actually it is, the developer decides it's just easier to try and deal with this offsite. Obviously, there's the biodiversity gain hierarchy within the planning practice guidance, so they need to be able to, evidence to what extent they tried to achieve gains on site. But there will always be circumstances where practically that's not possible, or ecologically that's not sensible. But also I think people are recognizing that this biodiversity net gain is about nature, but actually we know nature can provide a range of other benefits to us as people in terms of health, well-being, but also the resilience of places, the livability, the wider kind of placemaking, if you like, as well. So I think there's often a wider story at play here as well, where developers are keen to include sometimes other features within a scheme. Sometimes it's things like SUDs or kind of other things which can all count towards your biodiversity net gain, and which, depending on what the value of what you were developing on in the first place, may go some way to actually fully meeting that net gain requirement or not. So I think it will be quite variable. It'll depend on the type of site being developed, and the smaller the site, the more challenging potentially BNG can be to do on site, albeit if it's a very urban site, it may still be quite easy because it may have a very low baseline. So there's multiple kind of variables as to what may be the best solution. There's also products coming through as well, which also will make some of this easier for particularly smaller developers, where there's tools available that they can plug their metrics into, which will help make that, help them make a decision as to what's best and most appropriate for their scheme as well.
Jack, you're off mute. Have you got a view?
I think the whole, Helen and Nick talking about offsite or on-site, I think for me, I think the missing part that's not really being spoken about at the moment is all about sort of being proportional to the density of population and the use of the site. I think that wider planning context isn't being spoken about enough in a nature context. And, I'm all for having people having access to nature. I think that's obviously a really important thing. But when, I've seen developers proposing lowland meadow on road verges, which just isn't achievable, or the only green space that's available for, a community where they're living, is being turned into scrub, which is then paid for by a service charge to manage and maintain and monitor, which they don't have access to. Their children can't play football on, and they can't walk their dog around. So I think there's lots of things about whether the habitats proposed are actually appropriate for that community that's living there, or the use of the site. And also, if that is the case and there is going to be a conflict there, is it a very robust system is that going to be lasting for 30 years when there's different needs and pressures that are going to be applied to it, which are actually the ones that pay for it?
Yeah.
So I think there's that side of things, which I think needs to be talked about more. And just regarding small sites, I think it is a challenge for small sites because it's new. And I think this is probably more of a shock to small sites than it is for larger developers. And but I think the overriding thing that I think is really important is just sustainability. It's having the environment as a pillar of sustainability, following the mitigation hierarchy, and actually having a cost which is proportional to the impact on the environment. I think as soon as you start talking about contributions that are just standard across the board, it loses the meaning of what an impact to the environment is, which should be factored into viability and whether a site should be brought forwards or not.
Nice, like that. Okay, a quick one, and Nick, this is probably a quick one for you. So Anders Enchan, who's the founder of one of the largest, if not the largest, and most prestigious ecological consultancy in Sweden, has asked a question on the basis, you talked sort of BNG being looked at internationally. I know EcoGain, I have been looking at BNG for Scandinavia, and he says, will there be sort of an official national evaluation of the first 12 months of BNG? Sort of a lessons learned document from Natural England, or are we going to be relying on webinars like these to pick up the answers?
No, so the good news here is that there is a monitoring and evaluation kind of framework and piece of work underway and has been for a bit now on Biodiversity Net Gain, because we and government want to understand, is the policy delivering as expected or not, or is there a need for some tweaks to be made? So yes, there will be the first report of that should be due out in the spring. Sometimes it's a piece of work that's being contracted out to a company called Eunomia, operating, doing this on behalf of Natural England, and we anticipate this being a repeat exercise going forward as well, so that we have that sort of macro view of what's happening on the, in terms overall of BNG, both in terms of the nature outcomes, also the kind of people side of things, and process as well. Is it helping to kind of smooth planning processes or not? What we don't get is, as NEs, get involved in the kind of site specific individual project level, but certainly at that macro level, yes, there will be that evaluation available.
Perfect. And then there's a question about, well, again, I alluded to it at the start about this. Sometimes there's tension between, we've got to have growth, we've got to have economic growth and stuff, and then there's the nature. But someone's asked about, is the BNG market, has that created a lot of economic growth? Are the new, obviously you're keeping lawyers very busy, which is great, documents on documents, but is there an understanding how big is the market? Is this been a success story that we can export?
Absolutely. And I think this is the bit that often sometimes gets missed as well, that this is a growth area in its own right, if you like, as well. So we've currently got, I think last count, there's 46 sites now registered. It's about 1,500 hectares. There's more sites being onboarded every week as well, so that figure is going up all the time. It's really interesting in that we're seeing kind of new entrants coming forward. So there's entities like Jax coming onto the market, but there's some non-usual suspects coming forward as well. So people you wouldn't necessarily think of as being interested in managing nature on their sites, but have got they've got skills available, accessible to them to be able to do that. But it's also led to a whole kind of sort of injection of venture capital into the kind of nature tech space as well. So there's companies and products coming through which are providing kind of tools and services for planners. We talked earlier about monitoring and AI and things like that. Other kind of electronic digital marketplaces, and some of that work is now starting to get exported internationally as well. So UK PLC is benefiting, if you like, from BNG, because at the moment we're seeing very much in the forefront of the kind of nature tech kind of field as well. So yeah, kind of exciting in that regard.
Perfect, thank you. I wanted to ask about local authorities, right? So you've got this mandatory at least 10%, and you've got some local authorities saying, actually we need to do 20%, maybe 25%. You've got some London boroughs saying maybe we need to go to 30%, which is probably an indication of how terrible biodiversity baselines are in Tower Hamlets or whatever. Is that something that Natural England's going to welcome? Because obviously, I mean, presumably great for the likes of Wild Capital, Environment Back, all those sort of more units to sell, right? But Are you happy about local authorities doing their own thing?
So we were really supportive and pushed hard for when the legislation was first being drafted that the 10% be a minimum 10%. But we also recognise, though, that going beyond that, there needs to be a degree of caution being exercised by planning authorities here as well. And so we also understood why the kind of wording on PPG actually got kind of strengthened slightly in this regard. So legally, 10% is, you can't challenge that. That's the law. Beyond that, that's challengeable. Our advice to planning authorities is think it through, make sure you've got good local evidence as to whether you feel that you can go above 10%. And an example of an inner London borough, for example, where you may have most, if not all of your sites quite low value, and obviously the 10% relates to the baseline, so above can be quite easy to achieve. But also, what's your expectations? Well, if you've also got a local requirement or local plan requirement saying you want local delivery, well, are there sites available locally for people to deliver to as well? So set out very clearly, is our advice, in your local plan as to what your expectations are on a developer, and have a robust evidence base, because someone will probably someone will probably legally challenge you on this. So you expect to have to be able to defend it.
Yeah, perfect. So this is obviously B&G's first birthday party. If we come back for B&G's second birthday party, B&G will be a toddler. It will be, running around, walking, fully weaned, having tantrums. But what are we? I'm going to come to you. I'm going to come to all of you on this. But Jack, I'll come to you first. What are we going to be talking about? What's the agenda for next year's webinar? What will the good stuff have been, and what will we be dealing with? Ridiculous question, I know, but I'm just trying to set my agenda for next year's webinar.
Well, I mean, I would say that a lot of the stuff that's maybe being talked about now as being an issue will be a non-issue, like education in local authorities, education amongst developers, but also the number of available offsite opportunities for people. I think there'll be a load of stuff that's maybe currently an issue, or maybe takes a bit of time to come through with new policy and legislation that won't be in a year's time. So I think it just needs a little bit of time to bed in. But I think what maybe the conversation will move to is actually, this is, although Biodiversity Net Gain was sort of 10 years in evolution to get to the point when it was made mandatory, which is a long time to test and talk to the market with it, it's still not perfect. I think everyone, even people who are Biodiversity Net Gain's biggest fans, will say it's not perfect. So I think hopefully the conversation will maybe start moving to, where are the teething issues? Are rivers and streams too onerous to be able to actually be implemented in practice? Is there too much risk associated with them? Do we need to change the approach there? Or is strategic significance enough of a driver to make sure the nature is put in the right place, whether on development sites or whether off-site? It's those sorts of conversations that I hope it will start moving to when these teething issues will become a non-issue.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen. What do you think we're going to be talking about in 12 months?
I think in 12 months, we will be reflecting on the changes that are coming up in November this year, when in respect of infrastructure projects, what we're going to find is that DCOs that are granted for those NSIP projects are going to be subject to B&G from November. And, is that going to create a huge demand for more units as a result? And then I suppose the question then is, will we see a CPO for land required for B&G? That feels tricky, I have to say, because obviously there is an alternative to CPOing land, which is to buy units. So I think you should have an agenda item for next year's webinar around that kind of NSIP conundrum, Ben.
Thank you very much. Nick, what does the next 12 months, what are you going to be untangling?
So, and I agree with Helen in terms of thinking about for NSIPs. Something else we've touched on, and I think we'll have more to go on next time around, is this question around what does kind of good management and maintenance, what's realistic delivery, what does that look like as well? Because there's been a lot in the commentary around the 1-year anniversary around, B&G hasn't actually delivered very much. Well, it won't have yet, because it's literally only a year old. And if you understand the planning system and understand how BNG sits within it, it's going to take a while before schemes actually need to do stuff on site or get to the point of needing to purchase units from companies like Jack's. So beginning to think and see actually how is it beginning to deliver and have a better sense of that, because it's too early to be able to talk about the ecology aspects of it really at the moment. I think what we can talk about and we've seen is the reinforcing of the mitigation hierarchy that I believe is happening, with people avoiding clearing sites where previously they may have done and seeking to retain habitats. So pivoting on to that, okay, what does delivery of it actually look like? And hopefully more kind of case studies and sharing of good practice and that side of thing.
Perfect. Okay, well, we've got a few more minutes left, so we're going to try and we've had some fabulous questions in. One of which I think I'm going to put to you, Jack, and hopefully your finance director's not listening, but are unit prices going up or down?
I think it depends where it is, to be honest.
Yeah.
In some areas it's very geographically constrained, and sometimes it's not. So, also competition as well will drive the price down. So I think invariably the prices have gone down, but I think there was quite a rush, I think, initially when Biodiversity Net Gain became mandatory, where there was lots of people coming into the space, lots of people on the market saying, I've got units to sell here. Including actually my own family farm. But I think it became realised, after a bit of consultancy and getting a baseline and a proposal, the actual obligations on offset, provision and the admin that's involved to actually process those and comply with the legal agreements. And I think a lot of them have fallen away, including my own family farm, because it's a full-time job to be able to administer it and understand the intricacies of it. So I think there's been a sort of a rush at the start, which maybe sort of drove the price down probably quite rapidly at the start. And then it sort of leveled off because it didn't go back up again because there was this perception of competition. But actually, I think a lot of the competitors in the offsetting space have probably fallen away now, actually. And there may well be more that fall away when this sort of comes to reality.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Nick, one for you. I think you can probably do this one quite. And I kind of alluded to this this sort of working paper, the planning reform working paper on development and nature recovery. And someone says, is the government's suggestion that they're going to change BNG to a central fund that developers simply pay into rather than doing their own BNG commitments? Is that actually going to come in and impact BNG?
No, so that wasn't a suggestion for BNG. So there's a suggestion that there's this nature restoration fund that you, as a developer, can pay into to help deliver the mitigation measures for protected species or impacts on protected sites. That can work with BNG. So those if they're habitat-based outcomes, they absolutely can also count towards your BNG if they're on the register and legally secured, etc. So we're keen to make sure that BNG and NRF can and do plug into one another, and are as interested as everyone else is in terms of what actually hits Parliament by way of legislation and its passage through the House as well.
Perfect, thank you. I'm sort of strolling through the questions. I'm sort of struggling to pick what we will do. We're not going to be able to get through them all. There's another 20 or so that we've not responded to, but we will download those. And I suspect I'll have first go at putting some bullet points together, and I'll see if Nick and Jack and Helen can be persuaded to mark my homework and get that, because there's some really important stuff out there. But I think we will probably call it a day there. We'll circulate that note afterwards, but it doesn't sound like BNG is dead, which is terrific news. Long live BNG. Look, we've covered a huge amount of ground today. I want to thank you, everybody, for joining us and posing some great questions. I'm sorry we couldn't do them all. I want to thank my panelists. So thank you, Jack. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Helen, for sharing your insights. And a huge thank you to Rosie, who you've not seen. She's behind the scenes and she's been the brains putting this together. So thank you so much, Rosie. We really appreciate it. We'll send you a copy of the recording. Please feel free to share that with your colleagues who couldn't make it, and you'll be able to say, look, I saw this live. It was amazing. You have to watch it. Yeah, and if you have any unanswered BNG questions, please do send them through, and we'd love to hear from you. So thank you all very much for listening.